everyone, I am back and I am going to try to get catched up. Tomorrow I'm hoping to maybe do 3 videos simultaneously, so I can give you 3 videos, so that will be up to the point where I would be tomorrow, which would be Wednesday. So I just went on vacation, got a t-shirt and some PJs too, so I am happy about that. But now it's back to business, and I wanted to talk about in this random video Disney again. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit to my nostalgia again, because it's been pondering in my head for a little while, and I was thinking that it'd be nice to do again a video about Disney. And I was thinking of what I could do, and what I decided was is that since I did the most scariest Disney moments for me in another video, I thought, why not talk about the most saddest moments. Now, these saddest moments I think can get a little bit more shoved in our face, I think, when it comes to Disney, because a lot of people really remember Disney for a lot of their sad or tear-jerky moments. And those things I think are fairly significantly mentioned throughout the movie-going community, from Bambi to Baby Mine to The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, just to name a few of the ones that are probably the most recognized. Especially Bambi and Baby Mine and Lion King would probably be in the top 3 of what most people would really associate with when they're talking about Disney's saddest moments. But I thought, instead of just mentioning the ones that I think we already kind of know, and we know that they're sad, and we know that they sort of fill us with this kind of inner sadness, I thought, why not focus on the ones that aren't really necessarily brought up as much? The ones that maybe more brought up than others, but maybe not as significantly as maybe The Lion King, as Bambi, Baby Mine, or Beauty and the Beast. Just maybe not the most famous of Disney's works, or at least it's more ones that are not really as highly praised. Again, usually the ones that we associate with are the ones that are highly praised with their sad moments. Bambi was a big hit, The Lion King was a big hit, Beauty and the Beast was a big hit, Dumbo was a big hit too. So yeah, I think it makes sense that these we would associate with and say, yeah, they have these sad, heart-wrenching moments. But I wanted to talk about some personal ones that for me made me a little bit kind of sad watching them. And these ones are underrated. So this is why this video is called my favorite saddest underrated Disney moments, basically. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to list them off and explain each a little as to why I think that they're sad, and then I'll make sure to put all the links below if I can. But the first one I wanted to talk about briefly was one that's probably more recognized than some of the other ones that I've chosen, but I think it is underrated in itself because the film isn't really as recognized as one of Disney's highest works. And I mean and I wouldn't classify it as that. I wouldn't classify it too as a very great Disney film, but I still think it is good in its own way. And I think that's the Fox and the Hound, and there's this one scene, I guess I'm just going to call this saying goodbye to Todd, and basically, in case you don't know what the Fox and the Hound is about, it's basically about a fox and a hound, and you'll kind of see how this older lady raises this fox. And if you just watch the scene in itself, it starts off sort of like this merry kind of feeling, like she's going through in her mind like all the memories she's had with this fox. And it's just so, it feels so pleasant. And then you realize it's really leading up to something sad because the music doesn't really sound so happy. And then I think this really gives it tension, and I think it gets people to be able to be more absorbed in the scene, and get people more emotionally invested. And I think that's why I was emotionally invested. And when Todd the fox has to be taken away into a safer place. See, the whole idea is that she's letting him go into the wild so that he can be safe, because she thinks that her home isn't safe. And if you watch the movie, you'll understand my reasoning behind this, or the reasoning behind this. But basically, she feels like she has no choice but to let him go, and just let him live in the wild. And so you'll see how she is like holding him at one point, and he doesn't really understand. He doesn't understand what she's doing, and like when she takes off his collar, it gets you really, I think, emotionally invested, because on the one hand you understand how the old lady feels, and you understand how Todd feels, because Todd feels like confused. He doesn't really know what she's doing. And she clearly knows what she's doing, but she feels like she has no choice. And then you kind of see how Todd is just like, doesn't understand why she would let him go. And it's very heartfelt, and it's moving, and it's depressing. I think it just highlights a little bit of people's lives and how some people maybe don't want to let us go, but they have to. They have to move on somehow. And sometimes moving on doesn't necessarily involve us being in their lives anymore. And I think that's just very depressing. I mean, it's really heartfelt, and it's heartbreaking to watch. And you don't even really need to watch the whole movie, but if you just watch that one scene, it depresses me. It depresses me watching it. And I think that scene was just handled so well. And yeah, maybe some people may say that the music may be a bit off, or for whatever reason. I think that's what the Nostalgia Critic was complaining about. But for me, that doesn't take away anything from the scene, because I still feel like it still plays like some more background-ish kind of music. It doesn't really, I don't think somebody singing in the background really affects it, for me at least. And they only sing one part. It's not like this person is singing like as she's like thinking about all of the memories. It's not like she's like thinking, me and Todd, we were so close, and then there's somebody else singing in the background. No. There's just this one part where this person starts singing. To me, that doesn't really take me out of it at all. It's just one little part, and I mean, the singer kind of sings how the background music sounds. So if the singer's trying to sound like what everything else what everything else is trying to do with the scene as far as the music is concerned, then I think it's fine. I don't find that to be really necessarily an issue, and it's just only that one part, and I don't really mind it. I don't mind if somebody sings in the background. That doesn't affect whether I think it's sad or not. But I just liked the contrasting viewpoint, how she's sad but is full of understanding, and Todd is just full of confusion and sadness. I think those kinds of different emotions, and us being able to identify with maybe both of them, or maybe one more than the other, I think that's very resonative, and that's just really well done. I mean, that's just a well done sad scene, and I think it should be more recognized by the Disney community, whatever people people who love Disney, or like Disney, definitely a scene to consider, and especially considering the fact that it's dealing with something different. Usually the most top scenes that we get are dealing with like a lost loved one, like with The Lion King, and with Bambi was dealing with a lost one. Beauty and the Beast, it was sort of similar too, although it was really a resurrection. And with Baby Mine, it was just kind of like this sort of forced distance. Whereas here, this feels like a more natural, sad separation. And I think that makes it maybe in itself a little bit more identifiable, because I don't think people really identify with being forced apart, but by naturally separating. And I think what they showed is really a natural separation, a natural way of how people can come into our lives, but then sometimes maybe all we can have is really the memories. And I think the song tries, or the person singing in the background tries to highlight that, and it's depressing. I mean, I don't care if that person sings. That doesn't really ruin anything for me. But depressing scene. If you want to cry, that scene's definitely worth going to. The next one I wanted to talk about was one in particular that's actually also interesting, because it doesn't deal with in the realms of the major ones, like the ones that we usually recognize, and that is a scene in Alice in Wonderland when Alice is lost. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but during when Alice is lost, she doesn't know what she should do, and she's confused, and she sort of has this kind of inner conflict within herself. She's kind of sad in a way, because she says like this line that I think is very resonative. She says something to the effect of, I give myself good advice, but I very seldom follow it. It's that idea of not being able to go through it in what you know that you may be capable of, and therefore as a result be kind of lost, and have this kind of inability to move forward. And I think really that's just highlighted in where she sits sort of alone in like a darker area, and it's interesting because she sees like all these kinds of imaginary figures, and they cry with her too when she's lost, and then when she's sitting and then she starts to really bawl her eyes out, they start to disappear, and I think it's these things are just kind of highlighting a little bit of her her inner self, her inner conflicts, and how those inner conflicts can like leave her, alone. And I think it just kind of highlights the idea of how sometimes we may feel lost or feel like we don't have a purpose or a significance because we feel that we're incapable of doing great things, or we're not capable of living up to what we expect ourselves to be, because we give ourselves good advice, but very seldom do we follow that advice. And when we don't, we end up in this kind of state of being lost and incapable of sort of moving forward. And I think that's why Alice's character in particular, when she's talking with the caterpillar too, when you see in another scene, she's like, I'm not completely sure about myself. Like she kind of questions herself. So I think that's really the whole point. It's just about her trying to find herself within this kind of world that she creates through her dream. And I think that's just very resonative, and very important to the story, and it's sad because I really identify with it, and when she cries, it does feel kind of genuine, and you do kind of feel like the innocence kind of shine through, and it's depressing. It depresses me. But I think that's really all I can say about that. It's more of an internal struggle, and I think that's very identifiable for people. Now the next one I wanted to talk about is in particular, again, not one of the best Disney films, but still a Disney film nonetheless, and it's called The Sword and the Stone, which I did review last Friday, where I talked about, and there is this one scene, which I think really does depress me when I watch it. It does make me sad. It's the point where I guess I could just call it, I guess just the squirrel scene. But there is one point where Merlin, along with Arthur, the two main protagonists in the story, they both turn into squirrels. And you'll see how there's this actual squirrel, a girl squirrel, who becomes infatuated with Arthur. And you'll see how funny it is at first, how amusing it is. It's kind of not transcendent in the way of in the way that Fox and the Hound was, where it's just like, yeah, we're trying to make it so that, yeah, you'll have memories, but then there's also like this sad thing that's gonna come. This one is kind of avant-garde, I think, The Sword and the Stone. And it's not so much internal as it is external, and sort of asking kind of, I guess, questions. And basically, what happens when the girl squirrel falls, or becomes, I guess, infatuated or in love, however you want to call it, with Arthur, at one point, you'll see how it's funny and comedical, and then it gets intense. And then, after all of these kinds of different emotions set in, it becomes very depressing. But what basically happens is just that she saves Arthur from I believe it is a wolf, because I guess wolves like squirrels, and as she's saving him, she kind of unites with him, and she starts hugging him, and he keeps trying to tell her constantly, like, I'm not a squirrel, I'm not a squirrel, and he says this over and over again, but she doesn't understand it. And then when finally Merlin turns him back into a boy, and she realizes that he's not a squirrel, it depresses her. And the reason why it makes me sad, it's just because I think it kind of highlights a little bit of, what we, how our feelings can, and can really be hurt by reality. The whole idea that sometimes our feelings don't transcend with the things that actually happen. And I think that squirrel scene just perfectly highlights that. It just tells us that, sometimes, love is just an emotion, but sometimes that emotion doesn't become a reality. And you'll see this, and it's sad to see the squirrel, like, so hurting by this. And then Arthur is just like, I really hope that you could, could understand. He is sympathetic towards the squirrel, but she's just like, she can't even bear to like see him, so she like hides, and she's all ashamed of herself. And I think that's just it's just very expressive, I think, for probably anybody. And then Merlin tells Arthur at one point, like, oh, that love business or something like that, it's a powerful thing. And then Arthur says, like, greater than gravity, and then Merlin says, why, yes, I think it's the strongest force on earth. And that's just so sad. And then to just see the squirrel just up there all by herself, just watching them walk away, watching her and Merlin just kind of cruise on away and just be gone forever. You know, it is depressing. it has that kind of emotion. No, oh, why? And then you wonder, and I always wondered this, like, I'm wondering, why didn't Merlin turn the squirrel into a human being? Because I think that would have really helped. I mean, that would have really helped Arthur. And if Merlin knows Arthur's future, then he could have totally saved him tons of time. I mean, with Guinevere and all of that stuff, but that's a totally different story. But maybe he's not capable of doing that. Who knows? An explanation isn't really offered, but I don't think that takes away any of the sadness and the emotional impacts that the scene has, because it could always be filled in with an explanation. But I think it just highlights, that sometimes things don't become what we want them to be, or and we realize how strong and powerful our emotions are, and how they could just have a very lasting impact on our lives. It doesn't mean that we can't move on and that we can't have maybe feelings of the same nature again. It's just that we still always have, the memory. And I think that's kind of resignative. And I personally thought it's a really charming, type-esque scene, but within itself at the end and how it displays itself, it's fairly sad. And it has that little heartbreaking, sad moments in it. So, and definitely a scene to consider. Next one I wanted to talk about was the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and yes, nobody really talks about this one, and I wanted to talk about it because it is depressing. Just from the organ to the dwarves just crying their eyes out, and even the candles too. Like, the candles are they're just so streaming with wax, and you really get this very powerful scene just by like the images. I would say this is a more visual type-esque sadness, because it doesn't have a lot of dialogue in it. Similar with The Fox and the Hound, where there's not really a lot of dialogue, just more sadness and sobbing. But I think it's just very highlighted in the expressions of the dwarves, and it's so sad to see like how they really did care about Snow White, and then having to see this happen to her, and then feeling so sad about it, and then seeing the characters that we really grow to like display the most powerful emotions. I think it's just very resonative. And when Grumpy cries, I think it just says something. It just shows that it just totally highlights another dimension to his character. And I think that's really important. And I think if a scene can bring out that that part of how much what happened is so resonative onto the dwarves' emotions. I think that really works. And then to see the animals sad, and then it's raining outside. I mean, just a very visual depression mode, like just very, it really tries to make it uber duper duper depressing with visual. But I think everything leading up to that really does highlight sort of the emotions and how we feel, sort of happy or sort of scared throughout Snow White. I mean, it seems like these two emotions are kind of ping-ponging each other, and then we go to this scene and then it's like really depressing. And I think that's really good, and I think it works, and it's just sad. It's just depressing. And the nostalgia critic mentioned it too, and he said forget Bambi's mom, and forgets his dad. This is the scene that makes him bawl his eyes out. And I think it's a fair estimate to say why. I mean, we really grew to know the dwarves and Snow White's relationship. And I think that's really why people really resonate with it. Not to say that the Bambi scene or the Lion King scene are any more or less sad. No, I totally think those scenes really do highlight something within the film. However, I'm talking about more of the underrated ones, and I was just quoting what the nostalgia critics said. But for me, this is just it's depressing. Next one I wanted to talk about briefly was Pinocchio, and sort of the ending-esque of Pinocchio. Yes, I know he gets resurrected. I think everybody knows that he gets resurrected. But this one I think makes me sad because he literally up and put his life sort of at risk for his dad, and usually we don't see that from kid characters, where the kid puts something at risk over the father. Usually we see in films is that the parents are supposed to be in front of their kids, and the parents are supposed to be the ones who do all the sacrificing, who do all the work, who try to make the best for their kids' lives. But here it's sort of the opposite, and that's why I find it kind of just depressing in its own way, because we see Pinocchio who is a character who up and almost risked his life to save his dad. And I don't know if it depends. I don't. It shocks me in a way, because I wonder if any child out there would ever do that for a parent. And I think that's what makes it sad for me to watch, looking back on it. Because even though I know he gets resurrected, and yes, I know that, but the important thing that you have to understand about resurrection is that even though you may know that the character's going to live, the characters don't know that in that moment. Like Geppetto doesn't know that, the Jiminy Cricket doesn't know that. So you're sort of living within the moment of these characters, and that's what you need to understand about resurrection. Even if Pinocchio died or didn't die, that doesn't matter. What matters is the emotional connections that they have, feeling that they lost something that was very important to them. And it's kind of just sad to see how Pinocchio risked so much to really prove himself. So I think that makes him a really great role model for kids, because I think even kids will probably be taken aback by the fact that a kid would be willing to risk so much. And I say kid because he's basically a boy in puppet clothing, or puppet physicality, so to speak. Um, but I think that's really all I can say about that scene. I think the reason why I find it depressing is just because of, how it's so different from what I've seen before when dealing with resurrections. Usually resurrections in Disney have been sort of like, a loved one is about to die, because they're fighting something, or basically like they're either fighting something or and end up having sort of a fatal wound, or they just suddenly appear dead but then they're alive again. And in this one it's different. It's like this kind of a sacrificial type-esque feel. But I mean, you could argue maybe that the Lion King is sort of, the opposite, with the Mufasa sort of being protective of Simba in a way. But I think with Pinocchio it's a little bit more direct, and you can just tell by his expressions and by the way the whole climax builds up, and then towards the end, that he put a lot at risk. And it's just sad to see these characters in this moment to know and feel that, what he did ends up resulting in his death, supposed death. So that's really, I think, all I can say about Pinocchio. Next one is Pocahontas, and just the ending. The ending is just depressing. It's very emotional. I think you could just skip all of Pocahontas, because I know Pocahontas. I really enjoyed it when I was a kid. I even think I had a Pocahontas like bed set. But now that I look back on it, I realize, it's not one of Disney's best. It's not. But the ending, I think, is just so resignative of this feeling that we may have when we're splitting apart from somebody, or and just with its music and by the expressions on the characters' faces, the emotions, the little bits of dialogue that are thrown in, the kinds of feelings that I get are very just powerful. I think this is a powerful sad. This is like a epic, powerful sad. All of these ones that I've been mentioning so far seem a little bit more subtle, or excuse me, subtle is probably the wrong word. What I mean to say is that they're a little bit more. They're not so. I guess very energy jam-packed or very epic. They're just more on the level of playing with our emotions, but not us being overpowered by them to the point where it's sort of a beautiful kind of a tragedy. Pocahontas seems a little bit more like a kind of beautiful sort of esque tragedy, because I feel like the ending is bittersweet. I don't think it's all sad. I don't get why people say, oh, it's all sad and it's all depressing. It's not just all sad. Again, there's other emotions here at work, because again, at least Pocahontas and John Smith were able to know each other. That's, I think, was kind of the whole point, was that, sometimes your dreams don't last, but the memories are kind of important. Similar with like sort of Fox and the Hound. Memories, it's all about those emotions that we have, not the ones that we don't have. It's that kind of idea, and I think it's very highlighted when they, wave, to each other. I think that's, at the end, I think that's very expressive. But again, it's not one of Disney's best films, but I can really say that the ending is very it's just very powerful. You can just watch that scene and then be sad. It's similar to The Fox and the Hound in that sense, and that it's dealing with sort of separation and maybe dealing with memory as well. Although it's not really so expressed as it is in The Fox and the Hound, because you don't hear Pocahontas as she's running, "I've had many memories with this person, and I'm going to say goodbye one last time." No. But I think it's there in the expressions that she gives sort of at the end, like, "I was happy to know you." You know, it's that kind of a feeling, I think. But yeah, just kind of that bitter sweetness, and it's just done, I think, on a more epic scale. And that makes it the more powerful, that more powerful and more resonative. So, I think that's all I can say about Pocahontas. Second to last one I wanted to mention it's actually a Disney short, and it's called The Little Match Girl, I believe. I think people have given different titles for it, but it's a Disney short, and there's only music and images, sort of similar to Fantasia. And what I really like about this one is just that how sad it is. It's very depressing, and this is like depressing the whole way through. But it's basically about this matchstick girl who I guess is homeless, you could say. I want to say that she's living in like Russia. I want to say probably late 1800s, early 1900s, and it's snowing, and it's around Christmas time, and she's selling matchsticks in order to, get some money so that she can maybe buy something to eat or something. And nobody wants to buy her matchsticks. And it's very depressing because she's just so poor and she's alone and she doesn't have anybody. And then she sees people, like, she sees at one point like a family coming out of the shop, and then like they have all these like nice gifts and clothes and they can go in like a sleigh, and she doesn't have that. And I think it's sad to see somebody, struggling, and see someone trying to, ask for help, and then nobody wants to help you. And I think this kind of a help is sort of expressed in a form of love. I mean, I think she wants to genuinely be loved and cared for, but no one wants to love and care for her, at least in the world. And it's kind of, and it's just depressing. The whole thing is depressing. The ending is very depressing, but definitely worth watching and definitely worth taking into consideration. And the last one that I wanted to talk about was The Princess and the Frog when Ray dies. Yeah, I know, this one is a little bit maybe my own personal taste, I don't know. But the reason why I think this is just sad for me is I kind of like the idea in The Princess and the Frog where they have Ray who likes this star, and he thinks the star is like a firefly, because Ray is a firefly. And you'll kind of see how throughout the film he's mesmerized by this star, which is actually which he actually believes to be is a firefly. And it's funny because it looks like it's the second star to the right, or Neverland or something. I'm not sure. It can be interpreted various ways. People have said random stuff. I don't know. But basically he's just he likes this star. And I find it cutesy in a way, but I think what makes his death sad is just the whole idea of of him suddenly realizing that he sort of has done what he sort of wanted to, I guess, sort of fulfill within himself. Um, and it it's kind of sad because uh, he just looks at this star who, I mean, the star is really not giving him anything, returning any sort of, I guess, real love, but he just admires it and sees something in it, even if that star isn't really, or if that star really can't give him some form of affection back. He sort of sees this star as just somehow so amazing. But I think why it depresses me is just the fact that, he it seemed like that this star gave him sort of a purpose and a meaning to life, and it's kind of sad to see him just die, and then have him just die in the way of just looking at that star. But it's also kind of this bittersweet feeling, because you feel like that he dies happily. He doesn't die, kind of cold and in loneliness like the little match girl. But at the same time, he's still dying, and it's kind of sad because it shows, like with the images, it shows his eyes closing and then him with the light of the star in his eyes, and it kind of depresses me in a way because of how much he saw within that star, and now he himself is no longer there. It's kind of hard to describe why it depresses me, but it's also kind of uplifting, because you'll see how at this one point, how he actually this other star appears, like once he dies, and you kind of think, oh, that's him now. He's with that star now. It's all kind of a happy feeling. So I guess I might be in a sense cheating with this one, because it is in itself sad, but yet has kind of this happy-ish ending. Well, similar, I guess you could say, with Pinocchio in a way, with resurrection. But I think just at that moment when he's just looking at that star and just and seeing how much and feeling how much that he cared for that star, I just think that sort of just resonated with me in some way. I think it's just harder for me to explain. But I really think that's all I can say. These were the ones that really stood out to me. I'm sure there's others out there that people maybe would like to recommend or like to talk about. But I think that's really all I can say about all of these ones. They all had their own special hint of sadness to them. But I think that's really all I can bring up about them. But any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. And until next time.